Previously on Detour Hotel.
Perhaps the proper question is, who are we? Of what are we each capable? What are we each capable of ignoring? If a bright young woman like Carrie Ann Harper can be so easily extinguished, who among us is innocent? Are we all culpable of a fatal naivete? What does each of us owe? None of these questions are likely to be resolved soon. To choose punishment or retribution for those caught in the grips of this epidemic is to choose the denial of something more devious within, something more systemic, and something that seems to grow in power each day.
Chapter 38. Captain Rawlings rounded the corner to find Harper sitting idly at his desk in the open precinct hall. The other officers and detectives from first shift had all headed home. Outside, the city lights were twinkling with a fading number of rush-hour taillights. "Harper, what's new, dude?" Rawlings asked. Harper glanced up at him and sighed. "Hard to say. It's tough to stay focused when it gets cold outside. Feels like it's always cold outside." "Nah, don't give me that. We ain't even had snow. You got another month of running the heat," Rawlings replied. He retrieved a small stack of papers from Lieutenant White's outbox and stuck them in his backpack. He turned off the lights to White's office and put on his coat. Harper looked around and leaned forward in his seat. "Could I tell you something, since you're here? Since we're both here?" Harper asked. Rawlings put on his backpack and checked his phone for messages. "Yeah, man, what's up?" Rawlings asked. Harper turned and looked out the window. "I know this might sound crazy, but I don't remember sleeping." Rawlings adjusted his sleeves and raised an eyebrow at Harper. "If you talk to a doctor, no one remembers sleeping or exactly when they fell asleep or things like that. There's apps on your phone that'll track your sleep," Rawlings said. Harper shook his head. "I don't remember ever having slept." The fluorescent lights seethed in a low wavelength shimmer of blue, white, yellow. Several small stacks of paper were arranged neatly around the periphery of Harper's desk. Rawlings inspected him and buried some growing contempt. Harper had begun to bother him greatly. He wasn't washing his hair as frequently as he used to. His posture sucked. He said oddball things for which Rawlings and the other officers had no sane response. Wells had recently told him to give Harper time. Wells insisted that there weren't right or wrong ways to deal with that degree of loss. Yet Rawlings had lain awake at night convincing himself that he'd have handled Harper's strife better than it had happened to him. He'd have handled everything better than Harper had. The slightest comment from Harper now caused him to grit his teeth and hold his tongue. "I know it's been a tough few months for you. I get it. But what about dreams? You mean you haven't had dreams?" Rawlings asked. "I don't think I get to have dreams anymore. It's out of my hands," Harper murmured to himself. Rawlings took a step towards the door. His heart thumped in an unsettled simmer. "I gotta head out. Listen up, Roy." Harper leaned forward across the desk. "Roy, how long are you going to keep saying things like that? You didn't lose the right to live your life. It was her fault. I'll say it again. It was her fault. She made her own choices, and they were bad choices. You know that. Everyone makes bad choices. Some people get away with it, some people don't. You still can make choices. You can't get bogged down in tragedy. You ought to know that. It's over now." Rawlings shook his keys in his hand. He hated how frail Harper had become. He hated his 5-day beard. Harper sat back and shook his head. "There's no justice in that, in how it unfolded." Rawlings leaned down and put his palms on Harper's desk. "Justice isn't guaranteed. You make justice happen. We make justice happen. Knock it off!" A bubble of spittle floated down and died upon the desktop. Harper tapped his fingers in thought. Rawlings stood up and made for the door. It relieved him to a great degree that he'd raised his voice at Harper. "That's some tough love. Get something healthy to eat. Get some exercise." "I'll see you later this week," Rawlings said. He exited the precinct hall and left Harper staring at a tidy desk that he barely recognized. Chapter 39. The topic of justice was debated extensively after Roy Harper was shot and killed. The price of justice. The blindness of justice, the tyranny of justice, the impossibility of justice. 3 of the 4 major media outlets in Middle Tennessee explored the topic of unsolved murders and/or vigilante justice in the months following his death. Harper's name was mentioned by a state senator in his defense of open carry legislation. He was a hero to fringe groups, an Old West type maybe. The same image of him was used in news stories, that of him in a black cowboy hat looking out toward the distance, with a camel overcoat and short mustache. That picture was taken 6 months before Carrie Ann disappeared. Wren could see that image as a phantasm projected against her popcorn ceiling as she fell asleep at night. To her, that photo of Harper was like the lurching blur of Sasquatch that she spent so much time rendering for people. Spectacle and speculation. They were both figures that she'd never met and never would. No one knew what Harper was doing in that part of town at that time of night. Had he been driven mad by the loss of his daughter? Was he a lost soul, a man who had simply had enough of the wicked world around him? Many speculated that he had uncovered a conspiracy about the death of his daughter and had identified her killers. It was reported in the press as a tragic misunderstanding. Some posited that it was a drug deal gone bad. There were far wilder theories than that. Generally, he was romanticized as having taken the law into his own hands. It didn't matter. He didn't survive to be prosecuted or to explain himself. In his final moments, above all, he was relieved to have escaped the petty justice of man. He had experienced divine will. No one else in the world could have understood that impossible intersection of helplessness and power. There was silence, at last, after the roar of gunfire. There was silence in the gravel and muck. He knew that there would be. Chapter 40. Widow's Peak is a bar and grill on Woodland Street in the heart of Five Points. There are 20 bar seats, 15 four-tops, 5 two-tops, and a small deck. Parking's free for the first hour, or $15 until 1 a.m. There are only 2 TVs, both of which are behind the bar, and both of which are typically tuned to hockey, football, or episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000. There are 2 bartenders working on this March evening, Porter and Clara. It's after 11 and Porter's already getting his tilt together. Clara is stuck with a persistent customer who just ordered his 4th neat bourbon and is made entirely of 3-word questions. She ignores the slight nagging pain of a toothache and leans up against the bar to explain the minutiae of Tennessee liquor laws. If someone serves alcohol to a minor, not only do they get fined, but the venue gets fined, and they lose the ability to serve for an extended period. It's a death sentence for the bartender. No one will hire them if they've got that on the record, so that's why you get the stringent ID checks. My Aunt Diana is 72, and she got carded for wine when she went to an Italian place last week. It's just the way it is, Clara explained. The man slugged down his bourbon and flipped his credit card out onto the bar. Thanks for explaining, he muttered. Clara briefly looked at the card and returned to the point of service station. He suddenly belched and covered his mouth. He cast a shaky gaze across the chilly bar. There were metal signs tacked to most of the walls, a Titans flag. A big hunk of drywall was missing from the hallway near the restroom, the result of a mishap featuring a bachelor party, a football, and a single-night record of 6 persona non grata. Clara stuffed the receipt into the little black folder and propped it up on the bar. The pen flopped out. He read the bill and signed Harper in B- cursive. Kevin came out from the kitchen with a bucket of sanitizer. Right behind you, he told Clara. She scooted aside and let Kevin empty the bucket into the 3rd sink. I'm gonna snag these trash bags and hit my last break, he told her. She gave him a thumbs up as he placed the empty white bucket under the bar and hustled out into the seating area. He opened the door to the trash bin and started tying off the bag. 2 young women came in the door and Kevin instantly stood up straight and smiled. Kendra Brown, damn girl, you should have been up at Constellation on Saturday. He put his hands on his hips. Kendra rolled her eyes and laughed. All you talk about is partying, but all I ever see you doing is working. Kevin took off his baby blue latex gloves and put them in his back pocket. A wise man once told me that if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. You're on late night patrol tonight, girl. Kendra scoffed and pulled out her phone to field a text. Yeah, what you getting into tonight, Flacco? Well, living up to my legendary lifestyle. Tell you what, I might go out to the hotel tonight to party, probably get a bonfire going, drink some beers, who knows? There might already be 40 people out there getting crazy. Where? She asked. Detour Hotel, that's what my sister calls it. It's over by the railroad tracks. There's this bridge where people hang out. This comment quickened Harper's pulse from afar. Creepy. What time do you get off? She asked. Probably half an hour. I'm gonna have a smoke and then wrap up. Kevin pulled the bag out of the trash can and kicked the can back into the cabinet. Harper turned to inspect the man talking about the railroad tracks. Long, unkempt blonde hair behind a purple bandana. Hitting on young girls. He watched their asses as they walked away. Harper was nauseous. This was him. Of course it was. He picked up his empty glass and tried to take another drink from it. He dejectedly tossed the vessel to the bar and stood. He walked over to the garbage can where Kevin was inserting a new bag. He closely inspected Kevin as he slowly passed by. "Hey man, thanks for coming out. Have a great night," Kevin told him. He hoisted the full garbage bag over his shoulder. "Ho ho ho, right?" Kevin joked. Harper nodded and walked out the door. Kevin shrugged and hauled the bag out back to the dumpster. "Can't make all the people happy all the time," he said to himself. Kendra and her friend snagged tall beers and Red Bulls to go as Clara started to tally up her receipts. Porter turned off the televisions. Kevin came back in and started gathering empty dishwasher racks as the dance of nightly closeout commenced. Harper sat in his car waiting for the blonde-haired man to leave the bar. Kevin, that was his name. He didn't listen to the radio. He didn't run the heat. He didn't even start the car. He sat obsessively in the frigid night, eyes trained on the exit of the bar. Twice the door of the bar opened and Harper's heart raced only to find that it was a different employee heading home for the night. He remembered the depositions given in Kara Ann's investigations. There was always an insistence from Metro, from him, that there was another party, another person that she knew, someone that supplied her with the drugs, someone that had knowledge of the area. They had car tire prints. She was only 16. He felt his gorge rise and he breathed long, deliberate breaths. He had consumed a flask full of barrel strength before deciding to scout Widow's Peak. From there, he downed $37 worth of whiskey. That was including the tip, though. It had been worth every iota. This was the break he'd been waiting for, just a little more waiting. Worst case scenario, he'd sleep right here in the car. He had his man. The neon lights of the Widow's Peak sign split into radial beams as his eyes watered and his eyelids drooped. His head had nodded to the point where his chin had come to rest on his chest when he saw Kevin step out of the bar and zip up his hoodie. Harper snorted and grabbed the steering wheel as he saw Kevin mount his bike and ride away. Chapter 41. It was 10 after midnight at the Detour Hotel. Kevin pushed his bike up to the ash pit. No one was around. The wind was whipping hard through the underpass. Willow branches raked the reaches of poured concrete. All the rail lights were red. "Anybody home?" He could see the row of tents to the west rippling in the faint glow of the streetlights. Kevin fished out his pack of smokes and removed one. He squinted his eyes and looked up at the tracks toward downtown. 200 yards down the line, a string of Tropicana boxcars was parked for the night. The echo of stirring branches drowned out his footfalls. It was a real bummer of a bonfire. It hardly seemed worth getting something started. Kevin found his lighter and primed the fluid before spinning the flint. "Who'd you think you were going to find out here?" someone asked from behind him. Kevin spun around. There was a shadowy figure in a cowboy hat and parka. He was backlit in the orange halo of streetlights. Kevin put the cigarette to his lips. "You, I guess. You looking for something specific? Or you got something? There's like nobody out here." Kevin rubbed the warm lighter on his jacket before tossing it into his satchel. "I saw you preying on girls over the bar a little while ago," the man said. "You talking about where I work? Nah, man, I wouldn't say that about it. I'm just looking for a party. I look out for Kendra. I practically carried her out of the 5 spot a few weeks ago and got her home safe. She's my friend." Kevin pulled the ember of the smoke bright with a big inhale. "How long you been haunting this stretch of tracks?" "Hard to say. Might be none of your business," Kevin exhaled. "What do you know about the girl that turned up in December?" the man asked. Kevin scoured his memory. "The blonde girl?" "Yeah." The man put his hands on his hips. Kevin got the first feeling of unease. "Why would you think I know about that?" It wasn't about a mile from here. The man stepped over and lightly kicked one of the cinder blocks. Yeah, it was, right back behind you, Kevin pointed. He could see a figure coming down the tracks from that very direction. It looked like El Gordo. What do you know about it? The man said. She's a fucking junkie, that's what I heard later at least. I was not here that night, it was super cold. I didn't see her. He did, though. The man looked over his shoulder and spotted El Gordo. Gordo sauntered up, unfazed. Who's selling what and how much? El Gordo asked. I don't know who this dude is. He's asking about the dead girl from Christmas. Kevin shifted his weight and tucked his hands into his pockets. Jailbait. El Gordo passed the man and took a seat on one of the cinder blocks. Kevin laughed. He had nothing to do with it, dude, honest, Kevin told the guy. He went over and stood next to El Gordo. El Gordo dug in his pockets and narrowed his gaze at the intruder. Yo, are you a cop? I told the cops everything I know. I protected her from these creeps that roll these tracks. It was a lot worse that could have happened, El Gordo said. The man stood silent. Metro is supposed to admit if they're a cop, Kevin said. He plucked the cigarette from his lips. El Gordo rolled his eyes and tucked his hands into his pockets as a fresh gust of wind roared through the underpass. Who cares about the girl? You know, speaking of cops, I heard her dad was a cop. Tragedy knows no boundaries. Hell of a story. Settle down and smoke a J with us if you're down. I got the first round, El Gordo said. The man was statue still. His face was black against the inky amber of the overcast city sky. Kevin scoffed and turned to circle in nervous action. El Gordo pulled out a bag of weed and started rolling a joint in the windbreak provided by his coat. You know, I've seen quite a few dead bodies along these tracks. It must have been 7 guys that night that knew she was out there. Wasn't one of them willing to do the right thing. I told the cops the whole story. It's public record. El Gordo squeezed together a spliff and closed the bag. Kevin tossed the remainder of his cigarette down and stomped it out. He didn't feel like El Gordo should be screwing with this guy, or smoking weed in front of him either. What makes me think I ought to believe the both of you? The man asked. El Gordo knows this stretch of tracks. He's like George Washington, can't tell a lie. He's kept more shit straight out here than you'll ever know. What can I say? I'm the patron saint of little junkie girls gone missing, El Gordo said. The dark man stepped forward into a ray of streetlight. El Gordo looked him over and lit the joint. He put his hands into his pockets and smirked at the man. What you got to say for yourself, Hefe? I was a little junkie girl's dad once. I was a cop, too. El Gordo stared him down. Kevin put his hands on his hips and kicked the dirt. He blew out a nervous breath and pulled the satchel close to his shoulder. You don't say. Got any leads in the case? El Gordo asked. The Nashville skyline twinkled over his shoulder. Not yet, no, not quite yet, my friend, the man said. He opened his coat. Kevin grew extraordinarily nervous. You guys are really creeping me out. You know, I'm out of here, Kevin said. He started to walk over to his bike. He put his hands up and turned around to profess his innocence. I just want to say that I am totally... 7 gunshots registered in less than 5 seconds. Kevin's ears were ringing. His leg felt like it was separated from his hip and he was on the ground before he finished his sentence. A rush of pain came so quickly that it took his breath away. He squeezed his injured thigh and started crawling away. El Gordo was screaming. He couldn't see the dark man anymore. There was one more shot and El Gordo went silent. Kevin's chest exploded with terrible aches of fright. He got onto his functioning leg and hopped into the woods. He could smell Band-Aids and salt in the whirling night air. He flopped miserably into the darkness. He fell over a poplar log and screamed in pain as he hit the clay. It was pitch black in the stand of brush just beyond. He could hear traffic on the parkway. He gripped grimy leaf litter and tried to push himself to his feet. His left leg was cold and unresponsive. He swallowed and scanned behind him. The dark man was running after him. He could see his silhouette approaching. Kevin whimpered and dug at his satchel for his gun. There were 3 bullets left in the magazine. He knew that for sure. There were 4 bullets in the magazine before he'd taken the shot at Felicia's apple on her balcony. That was 11 months ago and he hadn't fired the thing since. There had to be 3 bullets left. He pulled the pistol through the folds of fabric and fingered the safety. The man had slowed to a jog as he saw Kevin lying in the bushes. He stopped and aimed his gun at the silhouette. Why are you doing this? Kevin asked. The man fired and missed. With shaking hands, Kevin aimed the gun and squeezed the trigger. Tink, tink. The dark man squeezed his trigger. Tink, tink. The man ejected his magazine and fished around for another one. Kevin gritted his teeth and quietly squealed as he desperately tried to fix the gun. His head was throbbing. He hit it with the heel of his palm twice and aimed again. He double-checked the safety and flicked it as he squeezed the trigger. The dark man spun and fell. He rose up to one hand and one knee and fell once again. Kevin pointed closely. His vision was swimming. He smelled copper. He could see the arch made by the dark man as he again rose to his hands and knees. 2 more rounds left. 1 round left. Kevin was seeing stars. The man stood and stumbled back toward the Detour Hotel. Did he get him again? Kevin could barely hold the gun above his leg. The gun felt as though it were being pulled down by quicksand. He dropped the gun to his lap, and it splashed as it made contact. The dark man tried to keep his footing as he fled into the night. He stumbled near the torn fence and quivered as he crawled into the nearby box elders. Kevin laid back against the log and stared into the cold night sky as he sunk into reverie. There were orange, purple, and white lights above him. Kevin watched the colorful lights pulse. He was super cold. The lights shone metallic as they arranged themselves in cubes, triangles, and circles. They twinkled to the distant sounds of train horns. It was getting warmer fast. Brighter, too. He shielded his eyes. He was standing in Fresno in the schoolyard, squinting his eyes against the sun. Jonathan was challenging him to a race. They were going to run from the backstop of the baseball field all the way out to the first pine tree, the one that everyone stuck their gum on. The entire 4th grade was there to watch. Mr. Veith was going to let him do it. The cloudless California sky faded as it reached west to the distant outline of the Sierra Nevada. Jonathan was fast. Kevin was scared. They lined up with their hands on the chain link, and Mr. Veith was going to count down. All the kids were watching. Laura was watching. Jonathan wanted to tie his shoes, and everybody waited for him to do it. He had Sean Kemp basketball shoes. Mr. Veith made sure they were touching the fence before he started his count. 3, 2, 1, go! Sparkling bits of sand thrown by his shoes hissed as he stepped as hard as he could. Jonathan was ahead of him, but he was leaning forward to try to catch an advantage way before the finish line. The kids were cheering them on. Jonathan didn't have good form. Kevin was going to overtake him. He was swinging his arms for momentum. Kevin used to hang out by the first pine tree. That was his territory. He would make it there first. Piff, 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 his shoes struck the lazy dirt of the outfield. Kevin was catching up to Jonathan. His legs were getting tired. The pine tree was near. He was going to win. Jonathan was struggling. He could hear them saying his name behind him. Kevin, Kevin. He was so close to the tree. Jonathan was fading. Kevin's legs were burning. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't feel anything. One last push. He could smell the sap of the tree on the finish line, golden, sweet, and waxy. The gum from 1,000 of his friends formed a galaxy of orange, purple, and white stars along the tree's trunk. His fingers touched the crunchy bark. Chapter 42. Do you remember Grandpa telling the story about Great-Grandpa Owen throwing the bags of flour out of his friend's plane? Kevin asked. Rin's feet were up on the dash. I don't think so. He turned down the radio and adjusted his sunglasses. I was just thinking of this because I saw an old biplane a minute ago. He pointed out the window into the sunset. Rin tried to locate it through the rush of highway trees but couldn't. How's the story go? Rin prompted him. Kevin nodded his head and began. This is one of the only stories I remember Grandma telling. Sometime back in the 30s, Owen was working in a bakery. I think he was driving the bread delivery truck. And when he got back from his bread route, this other guy that worked at the bakery had these bags of flour tied up with string on the table, and he was putting them in a basket. Owen asked him what he was up to, and the guy handed him a basket and said, "We're going for a ride." Rin wrestled her way out of the shoulder strap of her seatbelt and leaned back against the car door. Bakers are obviously done with their jobs pretty early, so this is right around midday. They drove out to the baker's house and he has a plane in his barn. He gets Owen to help him push it out to the grass strip behind his house. Doubt remains as to whether Owen was in on the plan all along or whether he was just the muscle, but they took the bags of flour and loaded him up into the airplane and took off. Rin started to take a video story of him as he spoke. The baker was allegedly a pretty good pilot, one of the first crop dusters in the Central Valley. He flew the plane out around the edge of town, lined it up with the main street of Hanford, and they barnstormed the block. Just as they were screaming by the bank, the theater, the grocer, Owen started slinging these bags of flour from the plane at the streets below. "Holy shit," Wren replied. Kevin used the turn signal and took the exit for Charlotte Avenue. The bags exploded in a huge blast of smoke when they hit. They made a bunch of passes, and all kinds of people came outside to check out the ruckus. Some people were pissed, some people were confused. Other people just tried to throw stuff back at them after they passed, allegedly super low, slinging bags in all directions. "Did they get in trouble?" Wren asked. It was the 30s. I think you could get away with any hijinks like that. The sheriff probably gave them a warning or something. It's impossible to think that the town didn't know who they were. They just thought they were ornery. In my mind, it's this awesome story of what America used to be. Of people like us, but unburdened people. Wren put her phone away and squinted into the late afternoon sun. "What do you mean unburdened? By law?" "Unburdened by fear. Unburdened by knowledge. They were so situated. They didn't do that to get a million views on YouTube. It was just fearlessness. Kicks, I guess. It's got an outlaw spirit to it. Could you imagine if someone did that today? An F-18 would shoot him down in a minute. Now we can only read about stories like that or imagine them in salons." Kevin ran his fingers through his hair and spoke again. "Wren, while I was telling you that story, how did you imagine it? Was it hot? What day of the week was it? What did Owen look like?" he asked as he spun the wheel. "It was hot. It was a Tuesday. It was probably May. The sky was bluer than we've ever seen the valley sky be. Women were wearing hats. People were shielding their eyes as they looked up at the plane. Owen had hair that was sort of long in the front, German-looking," she said. "What else?" "It smelled like hay and manure. It was dry. The stores were all made from brick, one story with facades. I picture kids standing and watching, just astonished. Maybe some of them never seen an airplane before. There was a big clock on the facade of one of the buildings." Kevin slowed the car and turned into a coarse concrete parking lot. "Did you post a story of me talking about Grandpa Owen?" "I did," she told him. He pulled the car to a stop and put it in park. "I hope I don't get ratted out for driving. I'm not supposed to be doing this," he told her. They both got out and walked around the front of the car. Wren brushed the hair away from her eyes and looked at her watch. "If they listen to the story, then they'll understand why you were driving. Blame it on Grandpa Owen," Wren said. She gave him a hug. "Yeah, exactly. I love you," he told her as they parted. He looked over at the church annex. "Good luck. I'll see you Thursday," she told him. She walked over to the driver's side and got in. As she pulled away, Kevin slowly strolled into the lobby and scanned the bulletin board for the location of his support group meeting. On the next Detour Hotel. "Sometimes a place like this is where you always been. It's been waiting for you," Rawlings told him. He leaned down and picked up the soaked remains of a scratch-off ticket. Vang put the hood of his slicker up over his head as a tinkle of cold rain began. "Maybe it doesn't have to be your last bad decision that gets you under the bridge, but it could be someone else's. Someone you never even met." Detour Hotel is written, recorded, and produced by me, Aaron Rogge, in rainy Nashville, Tennessee. Additional music by Lee Rosevere, Airglow, and Soft and Furious, licensed under Creative Commons 3.0. This work is adapted from a novel of the same name, by the same person, and is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or occurrences is a coincidence. Paperback and Kindle versions of Detour Hotel are available on Amazon. Thanks for listening.